Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. This time we're going back in time to 1978,
Oh, wow.
to the jungles of Guyana, to
Okay.
Jonestown. Um, this was a really fascinating story for me to learn more about.
Yeah.
I remember hearing about it when I was younger, but this
Mm.
is really my first time diving into the details.
Yeah.
And so we're going to be looking at this 1980 CBS special called Guyana Tragedy, the story of Jim Jones,
Okay.
um, and kind of trying to understand, how did hundreds of people end
Mm.
up following this guy, Jim Jones, you know,
Yeah.
out to the middle of the jungle, and what led to this huge tragedy?
It is just such a mind-boggling story. And it's one of those things that I think even decades later, we're still trying to understand,
Right.
how could this happen?
Yeah, what is it about human nature that makes this possible?
Exactly.
So let's start
Yeah.
with Jim Jones himself. Like, who was this guy?
Well,
Where'd he come from?
yeah, he started out in Indiana, far cry from the jungles of Guyana. And even as a young guy, he was really interested in religion and social justice.
Yeah,
He's kind of a potent mix, I think, that would go on to fuel
right.
a lot of his appeal later.
Yeah, it's interesting. The CDS special talks about, he was really drawn to these ideas, like almost obsessed with creating this more equitable world. It's just crazy to think that this initial sincerity, that he
Yeah.
seemed to have this genuine desire to help people,
Mm-hmm.
somehow turned into, the nightmare that Jonestown ultimately became.
Yeah. And I think that's where the charisma comes in. He wasn't just a preacher, he was a master manipulator.
Yeah.
He really knew how to captivate people and make them feel like they were part of something really special.
Yeah, there's even a clip in the special where one former follower describes him as a fine man,
Mm-hmm.
like early on.
Oh,
So
right.
it's almost like a
Yeah.
Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde thing going on here.
Well, and I think we have to remember that charisma itself isn't bad. It's a tool, it's a quality that can be used for good or for bad.
Okay.
But in Jones's case, I think you can definitely see how it was kind of weaponized as a
Exactly.
way to gain power and control.
How did he do that? How did he weaponize the charisma?
Well,
Give us the inside scoop.
he was incredibly good at using the Bible,
Okay.
weaving scripture into these really powerful sermons that resonated with people. He offered hope and a sense of belonging, especially to people who felt marginalized or disillusioned.
Okay, so he was like kind of tapping into people's deepest desires and fears.
Exactly.
Right.
He promised them salvation, a utopian community where everyone was equal
Right.
and loved. But then, there was this darker undercurrent to it as well because he started demanding absolute loyalty and obedience.
Yeah, the CBS special really shows those manipulative tactics
Oh, yeah.
that he used, like public shaming,
Yeah.
taking advantage of people financially,
Right.
and even like staging these fake miracles to make it seem like he had these healing powers.
Right.
It's just chilling to see how easily people fell under his spell.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing with cults, often they start out with this, seed of something that maybe is good or genuine.
Mm,
But then over time, those intentions become twisted
yeah.
and it turns into something that ultimately just benefits the leader.
So this is where the People's Temple comes in, right?
Hmm.
This was his church in Indianapolis.
Right.
Did everyone who joined just blindly follow him, or was there more to it?
I think it's important to remember that for many people, it wasn't just about blind faith.
Right.
It was about the community
Yeah.
that he created. This was a time of, social upheaval. People were looking for meaning and connection, and the
Right.
temple offered that.
Okay.
It was a place to belong.
It's like he tapped into this primal human need
Yeah.
for connection
Right.
and then exploited it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then the more power he gained, the more the temple became this authoritarian structure with these, strange rituals and loyalty tests and public confessions.
Yeah, there's that one scene that I keep thinking about from the CBS special where he forces this woman to denounce her own family
Yeah.
in front of everybody. It's just heartbreaking to watch.
Yeah, well, that's a classic tactic you see in cults.
Yeah.
It's about breaking down people's individual identities and replacing it with this collective identity
Right.
that's entirely dependent on the leader.
Okay, so things are getting pretty strange
Yeah.
in Indianapolis.
Right.
But then he decides to uproot this whole community and move them to this remote settlement in Guyana.
Right.
What was he thinking? Was he just running away from all the scrutiny?
I think it was more than that. His paranoia was really escalating.
Okay.
He was convinced that the outside world was out to get him and his followers, and so
Oh.
he needed to escape to this place where they could be truly free.
You mean free from things like freedom of thought and,
Yeah.
being able to
Liberty.
make their own decisions?
That's kind of how it ended up.
Yeah.
He called Jonestown this socialist paradise.
Hmm.
But the reality was far from it. It was harsh conditions, forced labor,
Right.
and, his behavior was just getting more and more erratic.
You said earlier that, cults often start with a grain of truth, but in Jonestown, it seems like the facade completely crumbled.
I think that's right. The isolation of Jonestown allowed Jones to tighten his control even further, and he became increasingly paranoid and abusive,
Right.
and his followers were cut off
Hmm.
from any outside support.
And this is really where things take that dark turn.
Yes.
Right, with Congressman Leo Ryan's visit and everything that followed.
Yeah.
But before we get into that, I think it's good to take a little pause here
Yeah.
and just kind of process everything we've talked about so far, because it's a lot
It's a lot to take in.
to take in.
And, it's not just a historical event we're talking about.
Right.
We're really trying to understand the psychology behind it all.
It's not just about Jim Jones being a crazy cult leader.
Right.
It's about what makes people vulnerable to these kinds of things.
Exactly.
It's about the desire to belong,
Mm-hmm.
the need to believe in something bigger than ourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how those desires can be manipulated.
Right, and twisted.
Yeah.
A scary thought.
It is.
Okay, so we left off with Jonestown basically becoming this isolated, almost like a prison camp,
Right.
ruled by fear.
Mm-hmm.
And then Congressman Leo Ryan gets word of all the things going on there
Yeah.
and decides to go check it out himself.
Yeah.
Which, knowing how paranoid Jones was,
Yeah.
must have been a really risky move.
It was. And ultimately it cost him his life.
Right?
Jones saw it as the ultimate betrayal.
Yeah.
Proof that the outside world was conspiring against him.
The CBS special has footage of Ryan actually arriving in Jonestown.
Yeah.
And at first, everything seems so like
I know.
normal people are singing and dancing,
Right. They're putting on a show.
welcoming him.
Yeah.
It's all very carefully staged, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Jones was a master of deception,
Mm.
and he wanted to present this image of Jonestown
Right.
as this idyllic paradise.
But then things start to unravel, don't they? When Ryan starts getting all these notes from people
Right.
begging to leave,
Yeah.
they see him as their only chance to get out.
Yeah, I mean, that's where you really start to see the cracks
Yeah.
in Jones's facade.
So he's got this ideology, right, that he's built up around Jonestown.
Mm-hmm.
But now here's all this evidence
Yeah.
contradicting that.
Yeah, that's that cognitive dissonance in action.
And I can only imagine what was going through his mind.
Oh my gosh.
How did he even react to that?
He
Yeah.
goes from, seemingly benevolent leader to this like raging tyrant
Yeah.
threatening anyone who dares to question him.
Talk about paranoia.
Yeah, I mean, it was completely out of control.
So it sounds like things were pretty tense already.
Yeah,
But then there's the incident at the airstrip
right.
where Ryan and the defectors are trying to leave. The CBS special does a really good job of capturing the chaos and fear
Right.
of that moment.
Yeah.
And then gunfire erupts.
It's just a senseless act of violence.
Ryan is killed along with several others.
It's just horrific.
just awful.
Yeah, and for Jones, I think that was a point of no return.
Yeah.
He had crossed a line, and he knew that the authorities would be coming for him.
So this is when he gives that really disturbing revolutionary suicide speech.
Right.
They actually have audio recordings of it in the CBS special.
I know, it's chilling.
Yeah, it's chilling.
It's chilling to listen to.
He talks about drinking the Kool-Aid.
Well, actually, it was Flavor.
Oh, Flavor Aid, right?
Yeah.
Is this final act of defiance.
Right. It's this really powerful example of the dangers of groupthink,
Yeah.
When you have a charismatic leader like Jones who's been able to isolate his followers and instill this sense of fear and dependency.
It's hard to imagine being in that situation
Right.
and not just going along with it.
Yeah, especially when you're in a remote location like that, cut off from any outside information or support.
Right.
It's like being trapped in a nightmare.
So over 900 people died that day,
Yeah.
including hundreds of children.
It's just heartbreaking.
It's just a horrific tragedy.
It is a tragedy.
It's easy to look back now and judge the people who followed him
Right.
and wonder how they could have fallen for all this.
Yeah.
But we have to remember that they were human beings.
They were.
They had hopes and dreams.
Absolutely.
And Jones just ruthlessly exploited those vulnerabilities.
Exactly. And that's why I think it's so important to understand the psychology of cults. to
Hmm.
be able to recognize the warning signs and the manipulative tactics that are often used.
You know, as we're talking, I keep thinking about the aftermath of Jonestown.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the world was just stunned. How
Mm.
could this happen?
Right.
What lessons can we learn from it?
Yeah, it was this mix of shock and grief and this desperate search for answers.
The CBS special
Mm-hmm.
interviews some of the survivors and family members of the victims,
Yeah.
and you could just feel the pain and confusion.
Yeah, they're grappling with loss, guilt, anger. It's a lot.
It's a lot.
Yeah, and I think it's important to remember that there are no easy answers when it comes to something like this.
Right.
You know, it was a complex event.
It's not black and white.
Right. It's not.
So many shades of gray.
Yeah, it was a convergence of factors. You know, individual psychology,
Mhm.
social dynamics,
Right.
historical context.
But amidst all the tragedy,
Yeah,
there were definitely lessons to be learned.
absolutely.
I mean, Jonestown became this cautionary tale
It did.
about blind faith,
Yeah.
about the dangers of unchecked power,
Mm,
and the importance of thinking for ourselves.
absolutely.
It's also a reminder that these kinds of things can happen anywhere.
Yes.
You know, it's not just limited to remote jungle settlements.
Right. Those who seek to exploit us, they can be anywhere.
Right. So
Yeah.
this deep dive into Jonestown has been heavy, no doubt.
It has been.
But it's also incredibly relevant today, don't you think?
Well, I think so.
Especially with all the misinformation and polarization that we're seeing.
Absolutely.
So how do we take the lessons of Jonestown
Right.
and apply them to our own lives?
Yeah.
How do we protect ourselves and our communities
Yeah.
from falling prey to similar manipulative tactics?
Mm.
Let's explore those crucial questions in the final part of our deep dive. So stay with us. Man, this whole Jonestown thing, it's really got me thinking.
Yeah.
Like, how do we prevent something like this from happening
It's
again?
a really important question.
You know, especially today,
Yeah.
you see how quickly misinformation can spread
Oh, absolutely.
and how easily people can get caught up in these conspiracy theories.
Right.
It's scary.
Yeah, and I think that's why Jonestown continues to be such a relevant case study.
So let's get practical.
Okay.
Like, if we're trying to apply these lessons to our own lives,
Yeah.
what can we actually do?
Well, for me, it all comes back to critical thinking. You know, we're just bombarded with information these days.
Oh, yeah.
It's so easy to just accept something as true,
Right.
especially if it, plants on our fears or confirms our existing biases.
So basically, don't believe everything you read online.
Right.
Do your own research.
Exactly.
Question the source.
Look for evidence.
Be like an internet detective.
Yeah. And be wary of any source that presents itself as having all the answers,
Okay.
especially if they're, attacking anyone who disagrees with them.
Right, like Jones always portrayed the outside world as this evil, corrupt force.
Exactly. It was a way to maintain control.
And that isolation was a huge factor too,
Yeah.
right?
Naturally,
Like
yeah.
he basically cut his followers off from any other viewpoints.
Mm-hmm.
How do we
Yeah.
avoid doing that today?
Well, it's tough, because social media algorithms tend to feed us more of what we already like.
Right.
But it's really important to seek out diverse perspectives.
Yes.
Listen to people you disagree with.
Huh.
Read articles from a variety of sources. I know it can be uncomfortable sometimes, but it's how we strengthen our critical thinking.
And what about those red flags you mentioned before? Like
Yeah.
those signs of manipulation?
Mm-hmm.
What should we be on the lookout for?
Well, I think any group or individual that tries to control your information,
Okay.
that discourages you from asking questions,
Right.
or that pressures you to cut ties with family and friends who don't agree with them,
Mm-hmm.
those are some pretty big red flags.
It's like that old saying, right? If something seems too good to be true,
Right.
it probably is.
Exactly.
Jones promised paradise, but it turned into a nightmare.
Yeah. And I think, healthy communities,
Yeah.
healthy relationships should encourage critical thinking and individual growth.
Not try to suppress it.
Exactly.
I also keep thinking about the fact that a lot of Jones's followers were just looking for a sense of belonging.
Right.
They wanted to be part of something bigger than themselves.
Absolutely. And that's a very human desire.
Yeah.
And it's something that manipulators often prey on.
So how do we fulfill that need for connection
Right.
without falling into those traps?
Well, I think it's about being discerning about the communities you join.
Okay.
Look for groups that value open dialogue, that respect differences of opinion,
Yeah.
and that encourage you to think for yourself.
So true belonging doesn't mean giving up your individuality or your critical thinking skills.
Exactly.
Well, this has been a heavy deep dive,
It has.
but man, so eye-opening.
I agree.
Jonestown is just this stark reminder of what can happen when charisma and
Uh,
manipulation
mm,
go unchecked.
it is.
And I think it's a reminder that we all have a responsibility to be vigilant,
Yeah.
to think critically,
Yeah.
and to build communities that value individual autonomy and freedom of thought.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, thank you for joining us on this journey into one of history's darkest corners.
Thank you for having me.
We hope you learned something and maybe even feel a little more empowered to navigate the complexities of our world. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and keep asking those tough questions.